I'm Joshua Adams, and this is the Industry Insights Podcast, where I am joined in the Rock Paper Simple studio by community leaders as we dive into industry topics and perspectives. Thanks for joining us today. I'm here with Phillip with Berman Hopkins CPA. We're going to talk a bit about ESOP, something you know a little bit about. Would you share let's start with what is an ESOP?
What is an ESOP? So an ESOP stands for an employee stock ownership plan. An ESOP technically is a retirement plan. And what it is a trust, and it's also called an employee stock ownership trust. The trust in this situation has the ability to purchase the shares of stock from a shareholder or multiple shareholders to really facilitate the transaction of selling their business. And ultimately, the employees will get to own those shares over a period of time because the trust will basically release those shares to the employees. And it's designed in a lot of different ways, but essentially it's a great opportunity to sell your company in a completely different way. So it's really one of the most exciting things ever, honestly.
Okay. Spoken like somebody who's really deep into the industry.
Very deep.
So it's something you specialize in. Mm-hmm. It is all you do these days, which is very cool. I remember when we were having the conversations about you saying, I'm going to go do this and just this. And so what would you say, what drew you to it the most? Like, we'll dig more into what it is and everything else, but what drew you to it? Why ESOP?
Well, I think the first thing is I've been doing business, finance, working with a lot of different companies for 30 years. Just have a long history. Started in commercial banking. I came over to the CPA firm back in 2000. So I've been there for 23 years. And just there's a lot of different ways that companies over those years that I've experienced companies selling their businesses. So shareholders saying, I want to sell, and goals and objectives are always going to be interesting when you evaluate that. But what I've really gained or gathered over those years is that the people that sell their companies, a lot of times when they sell it to a Mr. Big company, just for the motivation of, hey, I want to sell for a big multiple. A lot of times years later, that company is nothing like what they built. The culture's gone. Sometimes the company's completely gone. Many times it gets divested back. The original owners come back and buy it or buy it from the people that bought it. So it's very inefficient. So one of the things that drew me to ESOPs, it was a holistic plan that I felt like was a win-win-win for all different types of parties and people that are involved in the transaction. So that's really what drew me to ESOPs. It's just a different way to go about things.
Yeah. What would you say, why ESOP, right? So you talked about what is it?
Sure.
And we talked about what drew you to it, but why for the business? Why should they consider it? Yeah. Why does it matter? What's the win-win-win that you're talking about?
Well, let's break it down to shareholder, company, employees, and then there's some other things with the community and customers, that kind of thing. So shareholders, first off, there's ways to design the transaction where the shareholder sells their stock to the ESOP and they can defer the capital gains. So there's a huge tax benefit to that. It's called the 1042. So imagine having to pay 20% of the actual sale as capital gains tax rates. And you can defer that under a 1042. You can't do that with any other type of sale. So that's for the shareholder. That's one of the reasons. Now, if they decide not to do the 1042, what's in it for the shareholder is that the company itself is going to be buying the note back. So they're going to basically pay the note payment. Now, the company, if they're not going to do a 1042, they're going to be an S corporation, and they're not going to pay income taxes as an S corp forever. So now, again, just keeping it from a cash flow perspective, most S corporations are paying through distribution pass-through 29.6%, 30%, right, to the government. So the government says, nope, you don't have to pay us anymore. That 30% comes back in the cash flow equation, pays the shareholder back. So the shareholder benefits because it mitigates the risk of repayment over that period of time. So they win in both different ways, however we do it from a tax perspective. They also win because they have that sense, most shareholders that want to do ESOPs, they have the sense they want to take care of their employees. They mean something to them. They've worked with them for, they're 30 years sometimes. And so the legacy of the business, helping the company's employees win in the end, is a big benefit to the shareholders. They feel like there's some benefit to the whole thing and a purpose of what they've actually built. And then the other part of that for them is that they get to kind of be part of it. It's very flexible. The shareholders don't have to leave immediately. Nobody's changing what they've built culturally. So the shareholders win a lot of different ways. The company wins because many times, again, the company, as you think about it, is the people, but it's the idea that the founder had. It's the culture that was built. It's the processes that were built. So all of that gets to remained intact. So we get to keep the culture. We get to keep doing what everybody was enjoying doing, and it transitions that type of risk pretty easy. So in business, it's like there is a risk for some people as time goes on for them to do something with the business, right? So the company wins as well. Now the employees win directly because there is a wealth transfer. And the transfer of wealth really comes from this stock that was privately held that goes into the trust and that gets participated out to the employees. And so over a period of time, as long as they keep doing what they're doing, a very good example of this is Publix, which is one of the largest. It is the largest ESOP in the country. So everybody knows about Publix, and it's a big success story, right? But over a period of time, those employees can gain significant wealth. And one of the things I explain to people is like, why is that the case? Like, why is an ESOP company going to have statistically the employees have double the amount of retirement assets than non-ESOP companies? It's because the appreciation of value of privately held stock is going to go up so much quicker than a diversified portfolio and a 401k. Now, should you not have a 401k? Absolutely. But most companies have both 401k and the ESOP. So they're going to get that, plus they're going to get this other benefit, of which the employees don't pay for. So it's completely a benefit as long as they work there. So with the tax benefits, with that, they're basically the company is buying that debt down. And as they buy the debt down, the value of the ESOP goes up for the employees as well. So they also benefit from the company being tax exempt.
Wow. Now you mentioned there were some benefits for the community, for customers, et cetera. What were you getting at there?
Yeah. So let's just take your company for a second, right? So your customers like to deal with the way you guys do things, your processes, your people. So imagine you sold it to a private equity firm. They come in and they say, like, Joshua, I like what you're doing, but we got some better ideas. So we're going to actually change a few things in how you deal with your customers. And so instead of doing what you're doing, we're going to charge them more, or we're going to do some things differently. And suddenly your customer experience is completely different, right? So none of that can change. None of that changes with an ESOP comparatively, right? So you don't have to put your customers through that burden. And some of them aren't going to stay, right? And some of them might. Who knows what can happen with that? The value, though, the other side of this too for the customer is now you're dealing with every single employee that you deal with. So, they're not just dealing with you, but every single employee that you have, they're an owner. Right. And an owner thinks differently, and an owner engaging with, their customers. I mean, that's a pretty exciting thing. So customers get to benefit from that like plus, like you deal with a customer because you're thinking bigger picture. You're thinking investment long-term. You're not just thinking, hey, I'm here to 8 to 5 and I'm just going to get you through the situation. So now that's not always going to be perfect, but that's available to people.
Okay.
So
a lot of benefits here. What are some of the challenges, right? Looking at, hey, if any ESOP, and I'm going to ask you a little bit, like when should I start thinking about it kind of thing, but what are some challenges people run into?
Well, the first off is education. People don't really get it. That's why I did the podcast. That's why I do the podcast. And the
name of your podcast for everybody watching in case they want to go check it out.
Let me just say credit to you guys, right? You guys helped us build the graphics on it, but it's the ESOP Guy, and it's journeytoanesop.com is our own website. So you can check out, we're 4 seasons in now, which how can I have
seasons already?
4 seasons, and I probably have almost 200 episodes. So how could I have that much to talk about with ESOPs? But I have a lot.
Sorry for interrupting you, but I thought it was important to share your podcast with everybody. But my original question was, what are some challenges people run into when it comes to maybe doing an ESOP?
Sure. Yeah, I think the bigger challenge is they don't understand ESOPs and the availability of what I would say the advisors, say CPAs, attorneys, insurance folks, whoever's advising these companies, they don't really know about them as much. There's only 7,000 ESOPs in the entire country. So that's not a lot considering there's like 2.9 million businesses. So it's a very small fraction. So scattered all over the country, there are hotbeds like Ohio, California, Wisconsin. There are certain geographies that are they get ESOPs. The bankers understand them, the CPAs understand them, but unfortunately, Florida doesn't have that. That's for sure. And so I think the challenge first is understanding it. I think the second challenge is really going through the transaction. And most of the transactions, and I've done a lot of different research on this because I'm doing it for so long, are provided, the services I do are provided by investment banking firms. And I think the challenge is that the cost of that is so prohibitive. And the investment banking firms are very specialized in M&A work, right? Their job is to go sell a company. And again, the main focus in that is sell the company for the highest multiple. And that's how they get paid. And so what's happened in the industry over all this time is the investment banking firms are doing most of the transactions. And so really there's a challenge in that perception of what it's supposed to cost. And I've talked about this a little bit in the podcast, but the problem, I think the challenge really is that the information that people are getting are primarily from these conferences. And so nothing wrong with the conferences. They're great to go to because you get to meet all these different ESOP companies. But primarily the speakers at these conferences are big sponsors. So money talks, right? So money talks, you're going to be a speaker. And the only thing people are listening to is that one guy up there saying, hey, it's going to cost you 2.5% of the transaction. So they're walking away thinking, I can't do an ESOP. So that's a big challenge. And it's something I'm passionate about only because it's just like, to me, it shouldn't be that way. But that is the way it is right now in the industry.
Gotcha.
There are people that do it the way I do it, as far as putting a transaction together, which is very systematic, very, from a lower cost standpoint. There are other, say there are CPA firms that do it. There's other providers, but you're not going to hear from them in those conferences. I think some people will say one of the other challenges is that it's complicated. And so, when I first started doing ESOP work, I created this thing called ESOP process, 10 steps. I just had a meeting with a company today and we went through it, took an hour. And then they get it. It's not complicated, it's complex. And if you break down something that's complex, it's easy for people to get, oh, we do that piece, so we do this piece. So I think those are the three main things that makes sense. I would say.
That makes sense. So you obviously talked about what it is, we talked about challenges, we talked about benefits. When and why should a company start looking at hey, this might be a right fit for my exit plan, for protecting my legacy, for protecting my employees? When should a company be going, maybe I should talk to a Phillip Hayes, the ESOP guy?
Sure. No, that's a good question. And when I first got into this, you get kind of focused myopically on it's an exit plan, but it's really so much more than an exit plan. So, that would lead you to think, well, you need to be 65 or 70 or whatever, or just be super tired. And I don't want to do this anymore. Most of the deals I put together are not to directly deal with the exit. It's to deal with the multiple things that happen. So succession planning, as it relates to how do I bring my key people into specific positions in the company, is going to be a big part of how we design an ESOP. We do a lot of partial ESOPs. So I have a call today with somebody that's 45 years old. They own the company. And they want to do an ESOP. So why would a 45-year-old that runs the business want to exit? They don't. But what they find in the planning side is that you can do a lot to engage the team in the ownership of the company. And at the same time, take the tax benefits, use those tax benefits to pay off the debt. And now you have more ongoing capital to grow the business, and then eventually do another stage transaction, and then maybe another stage. So you could do a 10-year plan, which I have some clients that are doing that, 30% transaction, wait for a few more years, do another 30%, and then sell the rest in the 10th year. Meanwhile, you're building value all along the way the best thing is you're using the government's money. Now, this is an IRS subsidy, and it's awesome. That's one of the other reasons I love doing ESOPs, because we don't have to pay taxes. And they don't have to pay taxes.
Right,
I still pay a lot of taxes. So that's not fun. But I love the government not getting that money. That's just my personal view.
Right. Okay. And so you think the best, there's not really a best time then necessarily. It's more of a where is the business in terms of team and structure, and are they ready for, because it's not just an exit, kind of to your point, right? And we've talked about this before. It's not just an exit. Sometimes it's a restructuring. Sometimes it's a part of a longer term strategy, whether it be just to make sure things are all prepared in case of an exit for whatever reason.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily have to be one point or another. Is that correct?
A lot of the owners that we do business or for ESOPs, even if I did 100% ESOP, they're still there for the next 5 years. They're not trying to leave in the next 2 years, So it's just helps them to get the ownership part off the table. So if you think about succession planning, you have two categories. You have ownership transition and management transition. And sometimes people all lump that together. But if you break those up in two pieces, right? I might own the stock and I want to get rid of that, but I still love doing my job, right? And I'm young enough to have I could do this for another 15 years or whatever. So, or sometimes I've done all the management transition. I don't even go to work at all. I don't even go to the office. And so I just want to sell my stock. And so you kind of go back and forth to figure out where are they at with both of those transition plans. And using the ESOP, you can kind of have tools to make it easier for everybody.
Great. So we've established what it is, why you would want to do it, quite a bit of information there. But what would the process look like, right? So if, let's say, hey, let's do it.
Yeah.
What would be that process you would lead me through?
Great. So I have built and this is proprietary, but I think it's probably similar for a lot of people that do what I do. So I'm not going to say, oh, I'm the only one that does it this way, but I've built a 10-step process. In the very first step, what we have to establish is what is the business worth. So we do a valuation model, and the model itself is going to be fairly involved. It's not a report. It's not like, hey, here's the report, here's your number. It is more about establishing some assumptions with the cash flow of the company and building that out. So that's really the first step, because you can't really nobody's going to really know how to do anything unless they know what the business is worth. And I kind of use that red light, green light thing. If that works, then we'll move on to the next step. So if that works, green light, the shareholders say, hey, this number is fine for us. This is what we're looking for. Then the second step would be to build a feasibility model. And the model itself is designed to figure out, hey, how am I going to get my money? I have all this money you said on the valuation. How am I going to actually get that money out? And what's true about an ESOP is it's going to be internally financed. And it's either going to be bank financing and seller financing or all seller financing. And so what happens is we got to make some assumptions, but I usually kind of involve some banks and come up with some experience in terms of how that gets structured. But what we're going to end up building in the feasibility is a cash flow model for 10 years to determine, can the company afford to do this? Can we put that much debt on the balance sheet? Can they afford to make those payments? And we're going to build every assumption into that. Then the next part, we're going to flip that over and say, for the shareholder, how are you going to receive the money? How's it going to be taxed? And then we're going to look at the employee base and make sure that those things are feasible. So if that works, then we're going to move on. And steps 3, 4, 5, I would say, are all about building out the rest, building out the buy side team. So we are the sell side team. That's me and the client, the shareholders, and then the ESOP attorney. Because the Department of Labor is basically very clear on this, this has got to be an arm's length negotiation. We've got to create a buy side team. So the buy side team includes a trustee, a transaction trustee, a valuation firm, and another attorney. So we organize that in steps 3, 4, and 5, and then we go and pitch the company in steps 6 and 7. And so we pitch the company, we release all this information, which is the data room, financials, just very similar to due diligence that you would have in a transaction. Once that's all done, then we're ready to negotiate. So negotiation, step 8, we go back and forth with an offer. The trustee comes back with a counter offer, and it's very, it's a term sheet, so it's very legal. And so we eventually settle on a purchase price and other things. And so from there, we're able to put the deal together and do the closing, which is really build the plan design as a retirement plan, vesting, eligibility. And then from there, all the other documents get put together. We have a closing. And then all the shareholders' stock now is in the ESOP when it's all said and done. So that's very quick, 10-step process. But that's how it works pretty much every time. But there's a lot of things that are going to happen in the whole process.
Yeah, and you make it sound simple, if you will. And I know there's a lot to that.
There's a lot. There's a lot in there, but at the same time, it takes about 6 months. People say, how long does it take? About from step 1 to 10, it's about 6 months. There's a lot of little timing things that we'll look at. When should we do that from a tax perspective? And that one of the things I found just in our approach is, because we're a CPA firm and we have a lot of strength in tax M&A, we've brought a lot of different solutions to the transaction itself that have added value that are beyond just what I do in terms of doing the transaction.
Right.
So.
Right. No, and I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think ESOPs, I find them fascinating. And one of these days we're going to talk, but I just find that really fascinating in terms of how it works, in terms of what it does for the business, but what it does for, and obviously the business owner, but what it does for the employees and allowing them to kind of take that legacy and run with it is very, very cool. And I love that concept of building something that it's more than just what's been built, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Right? And letting them run with that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. One final thing I'll say as we kind of go to the close is one of the things I love about ESOPs is it's politically the only thing in my mind that has bipartisan support. Republicans love ESOPs. They love ESOPs because nobody's paying taxes, right? It's beautiful. Democrats love it because we're transferring wealth from people that have wealth to people that don't have wealth. And it binds the economy, it binds the community towards something, because these jobs are important to some of these communities. I mean, I've had people on the podcast talk about their communities. I mean, this was the main employer, and they could have sold to a private equity, or they could have sold to an ESOP, and they sold to an ESOP, and those jobs stayed in that town. And just incredible things all over the country that have happened with ESOPs that don't get a lot of attention if you're not like focused on it.
Right. Well, Phillip, thank you so much for coming and visiting. It's been a while.
This has been a while.
We're going to have to get lunch sometime soon.
We should.
But I will say, if anybody wants to reach out to you, learn more about what this looks like, what's their method?
Yeah, go to our website at journeytoanesop.com. And the website has like testimonials. It's got like a tombstone of deals done. But more importantly, it's got all of our podcasts listed there. So they can go in by topic and say, I want to listen to that one. And then there's a feature in the website that's pretty easy. Just fill out a question. If you have a question, it goes directly to me, and I respond to those. And it's been interesting because I've been able to connect with people all over the country. Like, I literally have clients in like California, in Idaho, in Ohio, Connecticut. And a lot of it has come from somebody just putting in like, hey, I have a question. And so honestly, one of the things I love about this has just been able to connect with so many different people, so many different companies, so it's been a great opportunity.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I hope that you make some great connections from some of our listeners. But again, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Industry Insights. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, comment, or even drop us a line over at rockpapersimple.com.